Hello, I'm Ralph Sinkay. I'm the writer and executive producer of his stretch of Texas Ground. I'd like to speak to you about the making of the movie. You probably know that it's the sequel to my stretch of Texas Ground, which was filmed in 2018 and released in 2019. The reason I wanted to make another film is because I really like the character of Sheriff Joe Halliday. He is a cool guy, he is a great sheriff, and I think he's one of the best screen lawmen of all time. And in the film, you might say that he is a legend in his own time, in Vaticorta County and beyond. And that's because he's so capable as sheriff, but also because he's a very decent, humble man. He isn't full of himself. And that combination of great ability and humility is what makes him such an appealing character. Now, one of the things I learned from making films, and I've made 3 so far, is that a writer can impart qualities to a character, but it's the actor who brings the character to life. It's the actor who shapes and molds and defines the character. And that is certainly true in this case. Jeff Weber deserves 90% of the credit for making Sheriff Joe Halliday the man that he is. But Jeff did a lot more than act in this film. He brought us locations, properties that belong to people that he knows that he acquired for us. He brought us some of the other actors in the film, such as Gerald Broden, who plays his father, retired Sheriff Clint Halliday. And I very much like the chemistry between Jeff and Gerald. He brought us Cole Springer, who is a very talented young actor who plays the pivotal role of Hunter Dennison. He brought us Lorelei Linklater, who has just one scene, but it's a very dynamic scene, and she is a very talented young actress. And Jeff Weber also brought us his co-star, George Welder, who plays the leading role of the villain, Draven Dennison. Now, I first saw Jeff and George perform together in the short film, A Deadly Charter, and I noticed right away that they had tremendous chemistry together. They're both very good-looking guys, but in a very different way. Jeff has a very polished look, whereas George has a very wild look with that long silver hair of his. What I thought was that the contrast and polarity between them created a very cinematic effect. I liked it in that film, and it proved to work just as well in this film. So, much thanks to Jeff Weber for bringing us George Welder. Another thing that Jeff Weber did was work on the song that I wrote for the film, which is called I'll Always Come Home to You. Now, Jeff is an accomplished singer and songwriter, and upon hearing it, he made some recommendations for melodic changes, which I adopted because they were good ideas. He also suggested some lyrics changes, which I also used because they were spot on right for the song. And he also recommended bringing in a backup singer, Christy Mims, and Jeff and Christy harmonized beautifully together. And I will admit that that is something that I would not have thought of doing. So I'm very grateful to Jeff Weber for all the help he provided for this song. One of the things that I think make this film work so well is the chemistry between the actors, starting with Jeff Weber and Hayley Reigns, who plays his wife, Carrie Halliday. I can tell you from being there, watching them, that when they start performing in front of the camera, it's like magic. They bring out the best in each other. They help each other go into character deeper, and I mean 100%. Jeff Weber and Hayley Reigns are my favorite screen couple, and I'm sure they always will be. Now, another combination that worked very well was that of Jeff Weber with his 2 deputies, who were played by Jeff Caperton and Carlton Caudle. Now, keep in mind that Joe Halliday was an only child, so he has no brothers. But these 2 deputies, they're more than his deputies. They're his closest friends, and they are really like brothers to him. And that comes across in the movie. And I thank the actors, Jeff Caperton and Carlton Caudle, as well as Jeff Weber. Now, Jeff Caperton, his character, Deputy Nelson Harris, is the third biggest role in the movie, and he actually sees the most action and the most danger of anyone. But Jeff Caperton did a lot more than act in this film. He's the producer of the film. And living in Houston, Texas, as he does, and being very familiar with all the film houses in Houston, he was able to get us all of the uniforms and props and other things that we needed at low prices, which helped control the budget of the film. So I'm very grateful to Jeff Caperton for that. But Jeff Caperton also contributed a lot in post-production. He watched the film over and over and over again, taking notes and making recommendations to us for editing changes, which we were able to use. And I should point out that Jeff Weber did the same thing, watched the film again and again. And Jeff Weber's got great eyes and great ears, and he caught things that nobody else did. So I'm very grateful to both Jeffs for what they did in post-production. But getting back to Carlton Caudle, Carlton came to us very late. We had slated another actor to play Dave Calder, but that actor bailed out on us. And so Carlton came in like with 1 day's notice. He learned his dialogue, and again, there was great chemistry between Carlton and Jeff. And I was so impressed that I've made the decision that in the next installment of the Joe Halladin saga, a film to be called Joe Halladin, The Case of the Missing Sister, Carlton Caudle is going to reprise his role as Dave Calder, and it is going to be a bigger role, and the dynamic between him and Jeff Weber is going to be on an even larger scale. So I'm very much looking forward to making that hopefully next year and working again with Carlton. Now, another combination that worked very well was Jeff Weber and Carl Bailey. Carl plays the lead FBI agent, and there was supposed to be a testy relationship between him and Sheriff Joe, and there was, thanks to both of those actors. Another combination I liked very much was Jeff Weber and Elizabeth Joy. Now, Elizabeth had a small role in the first film, just one scene with Jeff Weber. I noticed right away that they had great chemistry and they looked great together, and that's why I casted her in this film. And I'll also tell you that Elizabeth is going to have an even larger role in the next installment, Joe Halladin, The Case of the Missing Sister. So you'll be seeing more of her. Finally, I want to mention Hayley Reigns, who played the role of Becky Halladin. Now, we did feature Becky in the first film, but it was a very small role. It was played by a different actress. But in this case, the role of Becky Halladin was much larger. You see, the first film involved a crisis that involved Sheriff Joe and his son Tommy. But I decided that in this film, I wanted it to be a crisis that involved Sheriff Joe and his daughter Becky, because I liked seeing Sheriff Joe as the father of a daughter in the first film. So Hayley Reigns did a great job as Becky. She had wonderful chemistry with Jeff Weber as her father, with Haley Lauren as her mother, and also with a fine young actor named Jovan Holtz, who played her boyfriend, Jaden. So I appreciate Hayley coming here from out of state in order to play the role of Becky Halladin. I want to change the subject now and talk a little bit about the location that we shot the film, which is the town of Smithville, Texas. It's located about 30 miles east of Austin, out in the piney woods country of central Texas. Smithville has been promoting itself as a film center for shooting movies that involve a small town. And it is a very attractive little town. It's quaint, it's charming, also very Western. And they bent over backwards to help us get this film made there, with the locations, with crafts. And that includes the Smithfield Police Department. Besides providing us with help when we had to shoot scenes outdoors, controlling the traffic and the space, they provided us with police vehicles, with police drivers, and they really just went the extra mile to get us everything that we needed to make the film. So to anyone who's contemplating shooting a film about a small town, I wholeheartedly recommend that you do it in Smithville, Texas. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the song, I'll Always Come Home to You. It's based on a true story from my life. You see, I grew up in New York City where my father, whose name was Mark Sinke, was a New York City policeman. And in the summer of 1964, the Harlem riots were going on. And my father had to go out at night to work the streets during the riot. And my mother was beside herself with worry about it. She was just stricken with fear that something terrible was going to happen to him. And she pleaded with him not to go to work, to just quit his job if he had to. Well, my father was a man of duty, and he was going to go to work. But I remember that he took her by the shoulders and he said, "Rennie, I am coming home to you." And I'll tell you, that has stayed in my mind like it happened yesterday, even though I was only 12 years old at the time, and I'm 70 years old now. So that's what inspired the song. Again, I want to thank Jeff Weber and also the musicians who were involved, my good friend Paul Popa, also Rick McCrae, Terry Hale, and our sound engineer, George Coyne. I want to end this by pointing out to you that filmmaking consists of a lot of very high highs and very low lows. And that's because no matter how hard you plan and prepare, there are always things that happen. There are always surprises. There are things that you can't anticipate that come along, and they're almost always bad. And so it seems like you're spending at least half the time trying to solve problems and put out fires. And that was true in this case. And I would tell anybody that if you're going to be a filmmaker, you better have a very thick skin. But as far as the highs go, for me as the writer, there is nothing more fulfilling than seeing actors bring your characters to life right before your eyes when you're on set. That really is one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever experienced. And it makes the whole process worthwhile, despite all the stress that you have to endure. So I very much hope that my career as a filmmaker isn't over, and that you'll be hearing from me again about the making of Joe Halladin, The Case of the Missing Sister. Thank you for listening to this, and now please sit back and enjoy his stretch of Texas ground.